I had a request from Carmen Fernandez on my Facebook to do an ANKH tutorial. So here goes. Cut a length of wire, I would say a good 12 inches, and then find the center with your flat nose pliers and bend the wires up around the pliers so that you get your flat base for the end of the ANKH pendant. And that can be the width also of the base. If you want to make it bigger, of course, by all means, do that. So once you've got the base, then measure about 2 centimeters, 20 millimeters for that stem of the ANKH. And you could always mark it so that you can see the two sides of the wire, how you're going to bend them outwards. So a little mark with a Sharpie pen or whatever you've got. And then use the tips of your chain nose pliers and bend each of those wires outwards, away from the stem. That's going to be the sides of the ANKH cross. So bend them a bit further than you want them to be, because then you get a better angle, especially as this is 0.8 20 mil wire and it's round wire. Now for the length on each side, I would say it's half the length of the base, so about a centimetre or just over on each side. So you can always mark that so you can get roughly the same on each side. So put a little mark, place the tips, bend it up, and go a little bit more of an angle so you can get that sort of angled point of the bend. So now place the flat nose pliers to get the width of each side. So again, bend it down first to get the angle, so it's not too rounded at the tip. And now you've got the sides of the ANKH. So there you go, just get it to cross over at that point. And where it crosses over, that's when you want to bend it up again. So you can use either tips of your chain nose pliers or your flat nose pliers, as I'm using, to bend the wire back up, because you're going to form that circular bit at the top. So the ANKH is like the key of life. That's what the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, they've used it. It's a very symbolic piece in ancient Egypt, and it was really the symbol of life. So spend a bit of time getting those sort of little angles right, and that does take a little bit of tweaking with the tips of your pliers. And then push the wires out on each side. And now you're going to bind it. So I've got 0.4 binding wire. And the reason I bind it at this point is because it can distort when you're making the rest of it. So I just put a bit of binding wire at the center, because I'm going to hide the center anyway with a little flatback stone, or you can wire a bead onto it. So use a length of wire to connect at the center point. Doesn't matter how you do this, but just obviously do it as neatly as possible so that it's not too bunched up. And that will just help you hold the shape. So I'm leaving the ends of the wires there because I can use them later for binding my beads on. So I'm not cutting anything off at this point. But once you feel it's sort of held in place and it feels secure and it's not too bulky, stop at that stage. So I'm just about there now. Right, now I feel the whole thing, the framework is secure, just push those thin wires, those binding wires out of the way, and I'm straightening out the rest of those projecting wires, ready to create the top of the ankh, which is the rounded or sort of oval piece. So you need to find a mandrel that's the size that you want. So find something that you can wrap around, anything circular, and then wrap it so that it folds over on each side, crosses over at the top. And then where it crosses over at the center point, so find that center point, you could just put your ruler down the middle, and then bend those projecting wires back up, because that's going to be your bail. If you find your first mandrel is too large, the wire is still soft enough. This is silver plated copper, 20 gauge, 0.8 of a millimeter. You can actually redo it, put it around a smaller mandrel. So there's lots of flexibility to play around until you get the size that you want for the top. So if I wanted to go smaller, I could just get a smaller mandrel and just make that a little bit smaller. I might just do that actually, because it does look a little bit, that's better. I think that size, that smaller size is better. So play around with the shape, and then those two projecting wires at the top should be parallel, coming out at the top center of your piece. Now take another piece of 0.4 binding wire and wrap around those two projecting wires. This is going to be your bail. So hold it with your flat nose pliers and wrap and wrap and wrap a little distance. The main thing is not to wrap around itself, so keep the wires as neat as you can. So can you see that I'm keeping it flat in my pliers, and then I'm scooching the wire down so there's no gaps, and then wrapping it around again, and the same thing, bringing it all together and scooching it down so that it's all nice and neat, and that's going to be my bail. And I do that for about 2 centimeters. I'm just cutting off the end of that wire, that binding wire at the top. Now push that little bit of the bail forward so that it's going to sit central to the top of your piece, and then squeeze it together so you've got a loop at the top, and use the end of your binding wire to secure that loop at the top, that bail. So now that is secure, and you've got these two projecting wires coming down again towards your piece. So straighten those out, because this is going to be the inner part, and find a smaller mandrel to wrap around. So I'm pushing the mandrel inside the gap of the top loop, and then just creating a sort of smaller loop within. So that can distort, so spend a bit of time just moving the wires until you're happy with the shape. It doesn't have to be perfect. And now with the ends of those wires, wrap it around that center point. And that's really, up to you what you do. You can first of all wrap it around the middle, just by those, the two outer parts of the cross, and then bring it back up. Really, there's no, or you could cross it over. Really, there's no method to this. Just do it slowly. The main thing is not to make it bulky and not to distort your shape. So So now I brought the 2 wires down, and I'm going to create spirals with the ends that will sit within the sides of the ankh, in those side parts of the cross of the ankh. You don't have to do this. Obviously, you could cut those ends off because you can wire beads into those 2 sides. This is just one variation on a theme. So those little spirals will sit within those gaps. And just spend a bit of time making sure that everything is sort of as even as you can. So that's what it looks like now. I'm now going to just work harden, so I'm hammering with my planishing end of my whammer, so it's the steel end on a steel block, the ends of the frame, just the very, very ends of the frame, and this will toughen, temper, and work harden and make the piece sort of less malleable. It won't distort, the shape won't move around. Next, get your seed beads, whatever you're going to wire in to the frame to create a bit of colour. And I've also got my centre piece, flat back cabochon. It's a round cabochon. So now I'm going to take a bit of the 0.4, in fact I'm taking the centre of a longer length, and I'm connecting it to the centre of my ankh, and I'm going to start wiring in to that framework. So initially there's no space to fit any beads. So initially I'm just going to sort of weave the wire until it's connected to the framework, and I'm coming up on each side. You can do whatever weave you want, or you can just wrap around both of those wires until you get to a gap where you can start feeding or threading on a bead. So when the gap is large enough, and you might have made a larger gap than I have, feed a bead on, a seed bead on, and just push it into the gap of the framework, and then wrap around the side of the frame 2 or 3 times to create another gap, to create space for another bead, and then wrap around the other side of the frame, add another bead, and so forth. So you keep adding beads that can sit within that little gap around that rounded top of the framework. So this will be dependent on the beads you're using, the size of them, and whatever gap you've got. You might be adding 2 or 3 if you've made a smaller circle on the inside of that frame. And you keep going until you can't fit any more beads. I mean, I haven't given myself that much room. So as I'm coming around, I'm getting to a point where I can't fit many more beads. But I'm just weaving away until I will just use the end of that wire then just to bind the 2 wires together. So this is going to be different every time you make it because, well, I'm sure if you've done wire work before, you know every piece handmade has its own character and ends up slightly different. So here I am starting on the other side. Now I've done both sides, and I'm just going to end by wrapping the fine binding wire around both of the wires until it comes and sits where the bail is, right at the center. So it just sort of tidies up that gap. So you do that for both sides. Just keep binding both, around both of those wires until it comes right up to the top bail. And try and make it as neat as you can, because all the workings will be shown. And now for the base of the ankh. You can wind and wind and wind your whatever wire you've got left, and then start doing the same thing, weaving wires in between. Now I haven't got much wire left here, so let's just use it up on this one, this bead, and then I'm going to show you how I would add wire when I've run out, because there's never a problem adding more binding wire. So I need a bit more of this 0.4 millimeter wire again. So I'm going to add. So you find a little gap. So basically push the end of the wire just above that bead. So that will anchor it. And then start binding around one side of the frame again. And then you can just carry on weaving the beads in between the framework. So you're always going to be weaving a few times around one side to create that gap before you add the next bead, because you need a little bit of space between, otherwise they'll all be bunched up together. So you go all the way down, filling up the end of the frame so that it's colourful. Then it's up to you, whatever pattern you want to make, whatever colour you want to put in, whatever. You might even want to use semi-precious, little chip gemstone beads. And keep going back around the frame, feeding the beads on and across. Now I'm left with all these little spare wires. I'm going to cut off a few of them. I might just leave one binding wire in the front. So I'm just neatening up all the others and just leaving one, because that one wire can be spiraled, and then it can be positioned and flattened right at the center at the base of the bail, and it just creates another little decorative detail on your piece. So just spiral it right up to that center point under the bail and flatten it back down. Now we want something for the middle. I've got this lovely sunstone. It's a flat back sunstone, so you want to make sure that the middle of your ankh is quite squished down. So take your pliers, just make sure all your wires are sort of quite squashed. Use E6000 is probably the best glue for gluing on. And then I've put a jump ring around it so it looks like a sort of fake setting, but it's all glued on. And if there's any glue that's sort of come out of the sides, you can always take that off and just make sure it's positioned in the right way, and then leave it to dry for about 24 hours. And then you're ready to put it on a chain. And there you have it. That is a version, or my version. But you can see there's so many other versions. This one I have put beads on the sides. I put more weaving. This one I have woven in a different way and put a pearl at the center. So just create whatever variations you wish to create with your own beads. So I hope you enjoy this particular tutorial, and this is for Carmen. Thank you for watching.